So you guys are aware I just uploaded some videos about the resemblance between Titus and Jesus. And as you know, my bio says I'm just sharing what I'm researching. So don't unalive the messenger, as the saying says. So this is an article I found by Emily A. Smith, University of California, Santa Barbara, and it's on escholarship.org. This is about the Flavian triumph and the Arch of Titus, the Jewish god, in Flavian Rome. In 70 CE, the Roman forces besieging Jerusalem gained control of the city and destroyed the Jewish temple. The Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus, who served as general at the siege, were awarded a joint triumph to celebrate the victory over the Jews in Judea. Celebrated in 71 CE, the Flavian triumph is described by the Jewish historian Josephus, who may have been an eyewitness to the procession. The same triumphal procession is depicted on a monument known as the Arch of Titus, located on the Via Sacra in Rome. It was probably dedicated around 81, early in the reign of Domitian, brother and heir to Titus. In this paper, I investigate the ways that ritual and monument bring the Jewish god from the edge of the empire into the imperial capital, and how ritual and monument construct a Flavian dynasty identity. So listen to this next part. So there was a triumphal procession, and it brought the margins of the empire to its center, and in so doing celebrated the new geopolitics that victory had brought about. In the case of the Flavian triumph, the Jews of Judea were literally brought as captives into the heart of the Roman Empire, into the city of Rome, and before the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Taking these ideas further, Jody Magnus argues that the Flavian triumph brought the Jewish god himself into Rome. The Romans were aware that the Jews had no statue of their god in the Jerusalem temple. But Magnus suggests that the sacred vessels, the table of the presence, the menorah, and the Torah scrolls collected from the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, served to represent the Jewish god to the Romans. Thus, the sacred vessels paraded through the streets of Rome represented the Jewish god as a captive prisoner of war. Magnus does not carry this line of reasoning far enough. It was worse than simply thinking of the Jewish god as a captive. Josephus describes the items in the procession in rough groups. As noted above, he first describes all the amazing treasures and then notes that there were images of the Roman gods, animals, captives, and parade floats. After extensive description of the floats and paintings, and the mentions that were ships in the procession, Josephus describes the sacred vessels. And this is what he writes. Most of the spoils that were carried were heaped up indiscriminately, but more prominent than all the rest were those captured in the Temple of Jerusalem. A golden table weighing several hundredweight, and a lampstand similarly made of gold, but differently constructed than those we normally use. The central shaft was fixed to a base, and from it extended slender branches placed like the prongs of a trident, and with the end of each one forged into a lamp. These numbered 7, signifying the honor paid to that number by the Jews. After these were carried the Jewish law, last of the spoils. In this literary description of the triumphal procession, Josephus has categorized the temple vessels with the spoils. In his description of the procession is accurate, then the temple vessels were displayed with other spoils, inanimate objects, rather than with captives, animate beings. Ida Ostenberg maintains that statues of gods would typically be displayed among the spoils, and that without exception among descriptions of triumphs, the sculpture's gods are listed among the spoils towards the front of the procession, never with the captive at the end of the procession. Of all the words used by Latin authors to describe statues, only signum is used to describe statues of gods presented in triumphs. So I'm just curious what you got out of that. Because what I got out of that was Rome having a parade and throwing it in the face of the Jews that the God that they served was destroyed. That there was nothing left of him, only these trinkets and lampstands and golden items that was paraded down the streets. That was all that was left of their God. So Vespasian took all these material things they got from the temple and displayed them as spoils of war and said, this is all that's left of the Jews' God. So the treatment of the Jewish God can be seen as an inversion of the typical Roman treatment of or attitude towards foreign gods, perhaps as an anti-evocatio. In this case, the interpretation has shifted from reading a symbolic treatment of the Jewish God as an enemy captive to reading a symbolic treatment of the Jewish God as war spoils, and ultimately to reading a symbolic treatment of the Jewish God, him, as if he isn't a God at all, or as if he doesn't even exist. If he doesn't exist, then he doesn't need a temple or sacrifice. So James Rives argues that this is exactly the message Vespasian intended to send. In addition to the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, Vespasian ordered the destruction of the Jewish temple at Leontopolis in Egypt, which had been established around 160 BCE in the midst of the conflict between Antiochus and the Judean Jews. With the destruction of both Jewish temples, Vespasian effectively ended Jewish religion as he understood religion. After all, the temple and sacrificial cult were the parts of the Jewish practice that were most like Roman practices and most like the Roman concept of religion. But the end of the Jewish religion is just the beginning of the Flavian dynasty. So what Vespasian had was a military victory. The victory at Jerusalem was to the propaganda of the Flavians what the victory at Actium was to the propaganda of the Julio-Claudians. So the Jewish war and the Jewish God were present in the city of Rome in other ways. The Jewish sacred vessels symbolizing the Jewish God were displayed there for centuries, even becoming a pilgrimage center for later Jews seeking to see them. The Jewish God was rendered captive, powerless, and ultimately inanimate by Roman ritual monuments, and the Jewish people were made into the ultimate anti-Romans, defeated godless rebels. So in the end, the rise of the Flavian dynasty and ultimately the rise of the Flavian Divi, meaning Titus and Vespasian were divine, was at the expense of the Jewish God, and at least from the perspective of Roman propaganda. So let me know what you think about it.